Once, 1400 years ago, there was no such place as England. What we think of England now was actually 7 separate kingdoms. In the south were the kingdoms of Essex, Wessex, Sussex and Kent, and above those the kingdom of East Anglia. What we now call the Midlands was the kingdom of Mercia, and above that in the north, what we now call Yorkshire, County Durham and Northumberland, that was the great kingdom of Northumbria. Now, the first king of Northumbria was a king called Oswald, and Oswald spent most of his time travelling around his kingdom, overseeing his land and his farms and his estates. One day, on his travels, he came to, well, it was so small you couldn't even call it a village. It was a scattering of 4 or 5 huts, a place so small it didn't even have a name. But while he was there, Oswald saw a young woman, and he thought her very beautiful, and he asked her to marry him and become his queen. And the young woman accepted. And Oswald and his new queen were both very happy together. There was just one thing that spoiled their happiness. They didn't have any children, and Oswald particularly wanted to have a son. That way there would be a king to succeed him when he died and rule over the kingdom of Northumbria. One day, as Oswald was sitting in his palace, one of his guards came to him and said, Your Majesty, there's a man at the door, a most strange-looking man, but he insists on seeing you. Well, show him in, said Oswald. Let's see what the fellow has to say for himself. And into the palace walked the dirtiest, most ragged, tattered man you can imagine. His hands and his face were covered in dirt, his hair was thick and matted, and his clothes were little more than rags and tatters. The ragged man walked up to Oswald and said, Great King, I have heard that more than anything you desire a son. I can arrange it that you have a son, and all I ask in return are 3 pieces of gold. I don't understand, said Oswald. How can you arrange for me to have a son? Look, said the man, and reaching into his clothes, he brought out a small bottle. In this bottle is a potion I have made myself. If you and the Queen drink this potion, then I assure you, you will have a son, and all I ask in return are 3 pieces of gold. Oswald took the bottle and looked at it. 3 gold pieces for one small bottle, he said. That does sound rather a lot, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I won't give you any money now, but I'll take this bottle and the Queen and I will drink what's in it, and if we have a son, then do come back and I'll give you your reward. So be it, great King, said the ragged man, and turning, he walked out of the palace. Oswald took the bottle to the Queen, and he told her what the man had said. It might be worth trying, he said, and he took the lid off the bottle and... it smelt absolutely disgusting. But they were prepared to try anything for a son, so Oswald drank some of it. It tasted awful, but the Queen had some as well. Between them, they drained the bottle dry, and then they hoped for the best and waited to see what would happen. A couple of months later, the Queen went to Oswald and said, I have some rather good news. I think I'm going to have a baby. Oswald was absolutely delighted. He called all the noblemen that were living around the palace and he organised a great feast. As the feast was drawing to a close, one of his guards came to Oswald and said, Your Majesty, there's a man at the door, a most strange-looking man, but he does insist on talking to you. Show him in, said Oswald. And into the palace came, you've probably guessed, the ragged, tattered man. who walked up to Oswald and said, "Great King, I've heard your news. Congratulations. Now, you did promise me 3 pieces of gold." "Yes," said Oswald. "Actually, I promised 3 gold pieces if I had a son. The Queen is going to have a baby, but we don't know if it's a boy or a girl. Come back when the child is born, and if it's a boy, then you shall get your reward." "So be it, great King," said the ragged man, who turned and walked away. 7 months later, the Queen had a baby, a beautiful little boy. Oswald was delighted. Everyone in Northumbria was delighted. Oswald organised a great feast for all his leading chieftains and nobles, and they came to the palace, and as the banquet came to a close, Oswald held up his son in front of everyone and said, "Behold, this is my son. His name shall be Oswy, and he shall rule after me." And all the lords, the chieftains, the nobles and the warriors got down on one knee, raised their swords in the air and shouted, "Hail Prince Oswy, future King of Northumbria!" As the banquet was drawing to a close, one of Oswald's guards came to him and said, "Your Majesty, there's a man at the door, a most peculiar looking fellow, but he does insist on talking to you." "Oh, right," said Oswald. I'll come to the door and have a word with him." Oswald went to the palace door, and there, standing outside, was the ragged man, who said, "Congratulations on the birth of your son, great King. Now, you did promise me that when your son was born, you would give me 3 gold pieces." Oswald looked at the ragged, tattered man before him, who was even filthier and dirtier and more tattered than before, and he thought, "How can a man like this ask for 3 gold pieces? Look at him. By the look of him, he's never had a copper penny in his life." And Oswald said, "Well, my wife has had a son, it's true, but we don't know for certain. It was your potion. It could have been any number of things. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I'll give you 1 gold piece, and that's awfully generous. Now, take this and be gone." And he handed the ragged man 1 gold piece. The man looked at the golden piece in his hand and said, "1 piece of gold, is it? 1 piece when 3 were promised? Very well, great King, I shall take this. And you have your son. Enjoy him. Enjoy him for the next 2 years. Because, as you did not keep your side of the bargain, your son will not live beyond the age of 2. On his 2nd birthday, your son will drown." "How dare you say such a thing?" said Oswald, and he called his guards, and he had them chase the man out of the palace grounds. Oswald did not tell the Queen what the ragged man had said, and for the next 2 years Oswald and the Queen looked after their little son, Prince Oswy, who they both loved very much. But as the boy's 2nd birthday approached, Oswald thought about what the man had said to him, and he began to worry. And the Queen noticed how worried Oswald looked, and one day she said, "Oswald, my dear, why do you look so sad?" And Oswald told her what the man had said, that on Oswy's 2nd birthday he would drown. The Queen was absolutely horrified. "We must do all we can to stop this," she said. "We must make sure that on Oswy's 2nd birthday he is nowhere near water. We'll keep him away from the kitchen with all the pots and the pans and the cauldrons. We must make sure he is nowhere near a stream or a river or a lake or the sea." And they wondered where they could take him, where he would be safe. "I know," said the Queen. "We know that rivers cannot run uphill. We must take him to a high place, and there, high up, away from water, Oswy will be safe. They wondered about the high places in the kingdom of Northumbria, and there was one place they knew was very high indeed. Now, where we live now, at Stockton-on-Tees, you may know the place yourself. If you live in Thornaby or Billingham, you can probably even see it from your house. Do you know what I mean? Yes, Rosebery Topping, the highest hill in what was Northumbria. We must take Prince Oswy on his 2nd birthday to the top of Rosebery Topping, said the Queen. There no river can get to him, and he cannot drown up there. So, on the boy's 2nd birthday, King Oswald and the Queen and several of his chieftains took Prince Oswy to the foot of Rosebery Topping. When they got there, some of the chieftains had work for Oswald to do, and the Queen said, "Don't worry, you take care of things down here. I'll take Oswy to the top of the hill and guard him myself." So, while Oswald talked to his chieftains, the Queen took the child in her arms and started to climb Rosebery Topping. Some of you might have climbed Rosebery Topping in the past. If you have, you'll know it's very steep. It's quite a hard climb, and this was the middle of June. It was a very, very hot day. And as the Queen climbed higher and higher, holding the 2-year-old in her arms, she got very hot and very tired. And when she reached the top, she gently laid Oswy on the ground and sat down herself, worn out. "Oh, I just need a little rest," she thought. She leaned back, and in the hot sun, she fell asleep. No one really knows what happened next. Perhaps little Prince Oswy was hot and tired too. Perhaps he heard the gurgling of water, or perhaps he saw sunlight glinting on water. Whatever the reason was, while his mother slept, he crawled away. And when the Queen woke up and looked around, she couldn't see her son. She jumped to her feet and shouted, "Oswy, Oswy, where are you?" But she couldn't see the boy. She started searching all over the top of Rosebery Topping. And then she saw him. You see, there was one thing that Oswald and the Queen didn't know. High up on the top of Rosebery Topping, between a couple of rocks, there was a small spring that appeared. A small trickle of water, a tiny trickle. But that was where Oswy had gone. And the Queen saw her son lying face down in the water, and when she rushed to him and picked him up, she found that her son, Oswy, had died. He had drowned. She picked the boy up and held him in her arms, and sobbing, she walked back down Rosebery Topping. King Oswald saw her walking toward him, and he saw Oswy lying in her arms, and at first he thought the boy was asleep, but then he saw the tear stains down her face, and he knew something awful had happened. He rushed to his wife, and he saw his son lying still. The Queen told Oswald what had happened, how she had climbed Rosebery Topping in the hot sun, how she had become tired, how she had sat down, and how she had fallen asleep, and how when she had woken, she had found her son lying dead in the spring. And then, as she finished the story, her own heart broke, and she fell to the floor, quite dead herself, of a broken heart. Oswald was distraught. He called some of his men, and he told them to go to the top of Rosebery Topping, find the spring, and cover it with rocks, so that no one else might ever fall in it. And then he picked up his wife in his arms, and he asked one of his chieftains to pick up the body of his son, and he said to his wife, "Come, I'll take you home." For a whole day, Oswald walked carrying the body of his wife, with his chieftain behind him carrying the body of Prince Oswy. He walked all day until he came to the tiny place with no name, the place with just 4 or 5 huts where he had first met his wife, and with his own hands he dug a grave, and he lay the body of his wife and his son in there, and he buried them. After the death of his wife, Oswald became a much nicer man. There was a new religion in the land called Christianity, and Oswald became a Christian. He became such a good man that after he died, he was made a saint. People remembered him around Rosebery Topping, and there's a village next to Rosebery Topping called Newton under Rosebery. They built a church there and dedicated it to Oswald. The church is still there. It's called St. Oswald's. And after his men had covered up the spring, a new pool of water appeared at the bottom of Rosebery Topping, a pool of water that became known as St. Oswald's Well. And St. Oswald's Well was said to have magic powers. It was said that if you knew someone who was ill or sick and you took their shirt and threw it in the waters of the well, if it sank, the person was going to die. But if the shirt floated to the top, the person would live. It became a place visited by many pilgrims. And what of the small place, the place with 4 or 5 houses, the place that had no name? Well, over the years, more people came to live there, and it turned into a village. And a village has to have a name. Where people live, they have to call it something. And the villagers decided to name the place after the grave and the people who lay in the grave. The grave where Oswy by his mother lay. The grave is long gone, but the village is still there, just off the A19. You know, you might even have been there yourself.